Okay, let's get started. Good morning and good afternoon. Thanks for joining the February Radius Community Call. My name is Zach Casper. It's my first time presenting at the community call. It's great to talk with everybody. So first of all, I'll figure out how to navigate. So welcome to the call. Definitely be sure to try to be active in the chat. We have a lot of people from the Radius team here, so happy to engage with you, answer your questions in the chat. Raise your hand if you have a question. I think everybody's on mute, but feel free to raise your hand at any time, interrupt us, ask a question, raise your hand and we'll unmute you. So today, kind of our normal thing, our normal cadence, we'll have some announcements, some of the latest things happening in Radius. We'll go over the release. And like we do, we try to do a demo every community call. So this time we'll be showing you a recorded demo of deploying applications using Radius to Azure Container Instances. It's pretty good demo. And then just Q&A at the end. So just a couple of reminders. Here's our Discord. We have about 90 people online right now in Discord and about 700 other members. And there's increased traffic, particularly around contributions. So it's pretty interesting to kind of follow along. There's some folks, doing troubleshooting and some folks doing design and development work. So it's becoming increasingly used. So I'd encourage you to sign up and join the Discord server. On the Google groups, that's pretty low volume there. Really, you're just going to get the release notes, release announcements, and then announcements about this call. But if you want a reminder and get that on your calendar, join the Google group. If you type that rad app, it's radapp_io. It's kind of hard to read it, but great news. If you're going to KubeCon Europe, if you're going to be in London in April, we will be there as well. And Nuno Guedes is from Millennium BCP. They're a pretty large bank in Portugal. Actually got a session approved. He's going to go over how they're using Radius in production, which is pretty exciting. So if you'll be there, click on the link there and you can see the location, but hopefully it'll be live streamed, and I've figured out the time. So it should be about 8:45 in the morning on Eastern time. So hopefully there's a live stream. Actually, I don't know if there's a live stream as much as there's a recording. Anyways, whatever is available, we'll make sure it's pretty well known, and we have a channel in the Discord server as well. So KubeCon London. So if you're there, chat us up in that channel. If you want to follow along, we'll definitely get the video out there. I'm sure Nuno will be in there as well. So, and he's pretty happy to answer questions. So that's pretty exciting. Let's see next. Getting into some of the roadmap stuff and getting into the release. I tried to simplify this and try to navigate this. We have the roadmap, on that short link there, and we keep it up to date. Will and I have been making sure it's stacked, ranked, and everything. So that's kind of your canonical reference there. What's our priorities from the team? Just to translate that a little bit, our top ones are user-defined resource types. We'll talk a little. I'll show you. It's actually, we have a little bit in the release now, and we did a demo of UDT, I believe, in October. So if you're interested in what all is going on with user-defined resource types, I'd point you back to October, but then also stay tuned, because this is the really high priority is getting this user-defined resource types built up. I'll share with you a feature spec in the next community call if you really want to go deep on it. Number two is we are really focused on building out other deployment options in addition to Kubernetes. So you can deploy an application to Kubernetes today, pretty much the same Kubernetes cluster that Radius is running on. In the near future, you'll be able to deploy that to Azure Container Instances. And Will's going to show us the demo here in a little bit. We've talked about Flux before. We're finishing that up. For those of you that are using Argo CD, that's our next CI/CD tool to integrate with. It's on the roadmap. It's not like the next thing, but it is definitely on the roadmap for Argo. Yeah, yeah, container instances, particularly with the in groups. So you'll see that in the demo. Let's see, and then we're getting a community contribution around using Postgres for the Radius data store rather than the Kubernetes etcd. So that'll be pretty important for a production deployment. And coming up, control plane upgrades, auto scaling, just sort of the next level of detail on this. But really the key things that we're really focused on is user-defined resource types and serverless. Okay, and I tell you a little bit that to sort of tee it up on what all is in this month's release. So this month really has some groundwork for future features that I just talked about. So in this release, the big highlights are a new CLI command for creating user-defined resource types. It's not that useful today. This is just the first of many features that we need to push out into the releases to give the whole user-defined resource type experience. But we do have a new CLI command in there. Also, if you are deploying Radius using the Helm chart, so this would typically be like a shared environment, not a developer desktop. So this is not the RAD init user experience. This is, I'm setting it up in a shared cluster. So the Helm chart now has a Postgres SQL database in there, and in future releases, we will start to use that. So the database is just empty right now. And on GitOps, the deployment template controller, if you want to see this in action, there's a good video in the community call in August. So you can go back on our YouTube channel and see it. If you want a pointer, I can send you a link to it. And in this release, new contributor, Justin Maxenchik. Thank you for the contribution and welcome to the team. It's great to see new contributors. And just another reminder, just like Justin, this is actually literally, I know this is Justin, this is where it got started. So we maintained 2 tags in GitHub for good issues if you're interested in getting involved. So there's the Radius issues that are typically kind of CLI related or feature, backend related. And then there's the dashboard one for the GUI. So if you're interested in where to start, I'd say start browsing those issues and ask us a question about those issues in Discord. All the engineers working on Radius are in the Discord, so we'll point you in the right direction or give you some help to get started. Okay, I haven't been paying attention to the chat, but Reshma, just let me know if there's something we need to pause and talk about. Other than that, I'm going to hand it over to Will to talk us through. I think there's just a slide here, and then so I'll give you that slide, and then we'll show the video.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you, Zach. So, as Zach mentioned, we are expanding the supported compute platforms across to other platforms outside of Kubernetes. And our first foray is going to be into serverless container platforms. And for obvious reasons, serverless is becoming more and more important in the industry, and it's one of the top features that our community and users have asked for. So the goal is to deploy applications to Kubernetes or serverless container platforms without changing of course, changing any of your application code, and also not changing any of your application definitions. So your Radius application definitions, your app.bicep should remain the same. And with Radius, you should have the flexibility to deploy either to Kubernetes or to serverless without having to change that application definition. And the important thing, the biggest part of this work for us is to build this with extensibility in mind, which means a lot of the concepts that we had built into Radius initially that took on some assumptions with Kubernetes. We're going to have to pry those open and rewire some of this stuff so that we can not only extend to like the next serverless container platform, which is Azure Container Instances, and I'll talk a little bit about why here in a little bit, but we can then make it very easy for us to expand the Radius compute platform across other compute platforms. So next is ACI, and then we're definitely thinking about AWS Elastic Container Service and Fargate, and then eventually Azure Container Apps. So I saw a couple of questions in the chat around why ACI and why not ACA. The reason why we're targeting Azure Container Instances first is we wanted to the first foray of extended compute supported compute platforms. We wanted the first one to be something a little bit more unopinionated, something a little bit more just like raw compute and more building block type compute. We thought one that would be a little bit easier for the initial expansion because it shares a little bit more similar concepts to Kubernetes in terms of how to define the raw compute. And then also, I think it will help us learn a lot by just first expanding to something a little bit less opinionated and something that the community can build, is more flexible for the community to build around. And then, of course, we want to expand into other platforms like container apps and eventually into other serverless offerings that are completely different than container platforms, offerings like Lambda or Azure Functions and those types of offerings. So feel free to click on the link here in the slide and go read up on the feature spec that is currently being drafted for serverless container platforms. Give it a read, comment on it, go upvote on things that you like in the document. And now is a good time to kind of provide your feedback as we start designing the initial expansion into serverless. So maybe Zach, we can go to the next slide and let's look at the video. Before we press play, I'll introduce it real quick and then I'll give you the heads up to press play. So here we have it's a pre-recorded demo, but it is a demo of a prototype that the Radius maintainer team has built for Azure Container Instances. And note that I said prototype, it's not yet available in any Radius release or in any branch even, because a lot of it was pieced together as a proof of concept / prototype, but it is a working prototype. And in this demo, we'll show you how you can deploy with the same application definition across both Kubernetes compute and Azure Container Instance. So if you want to press play, Zach, we can watch the demo.
In this demo, we're going to deploy an application to Azure Container Instances, or ACI, which is a serverless container platform on Azure. I'm using an existing cloud-native application called TraderX, which has about 10 microservices. I've described the application in a bicep file, and I can use that to deploy the application to any Kubernetes cluster. I've got an AKS environment set up already, so let's do that now. By the way, this works with any Kubernetes cluster. It could be on my local machine, or even in AWS. Radius can already help me build multi-cloud applications today. But what if I wanted to use a serverless platform instead of Kubernetes? Normally, the choice of compute platform would be made up front, and it'd be difficult to change later. With Radius, you can use the same deployment files to target a different platform with no code changes. I've got another environment set up, but this one targets ACI. When I deploy the application, Radius is going to create things on Azure like ACI containers, load balancers, DNS entries, and other infrastructure to power the app. Today, if I wanted to migrate an application from Kubernetes to ACI, I'd have to figure out how to translate what Kubernetes is doing into Azure infrastructure like container groups and load balancers. I'd have to be an expert in both Kubernetes and Azure. Then when I'm done, I might have to maintain 2 versions of the configuration, one for Azure and one for Kubernetes. Now that it's done, let's look at what Radius created in Azure. In this resource group, we can see all of the container instance resources that are running the application. Radius can do this translation for me and manage all of the underlying infrastructure. I don't need to know all of the details of both platforms. I only need to know how to use Radius, which means that any developer can do it. Let's test the application and make sure that it's working. Looks like that's working. To understand this translation a little bit more, let's highlight how that's working for a single container. Over here on the right side, we'll visualize what Radius did for AKS, and over here on the right side, we'll visualize what Radius did for ACI. Over here on the left, you can see that Radius created Kubernetes resources like deployments, service, and service accounts. On the right side, you can see that we created Azure resources like container instances, load balancers, DNS entries, and subnets for networking. Radius support on ACI includes support for rolling deployments, load balancers, and service discovery via DNS. These are all good ideas that cloud-native applications rely on, and Radius can wire them up without becoming an Azure expert. Radius is able to deploy my application to both Kubernetes and to a serverless platform in the cloud without me making any code changes.
All right, so yeah, that was the demo. Hopefully the audio came through okay. We had to mess around with the encoding a bit to ensure the audio was at its full potential. But that was the demo, and it was for if you have a keen eye, you might have noticed that it was a very similar demo to what Mark Rasinovich had demoed at the Microsoft Ignite conference. So I'll share the link to that as well over here. Feel free to take a look at that demo as well. Mark uses the same deployment, but adds a little bit of background to ACI and the underlying technology. So feel free to take a look. And with that, I think that concludes the demo for today. Zach, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Will. So that was the last item on our agenda. So thank you for joining or watching the video afterwards. Just a couple of links there if you need to get to our GitHub repo or Google group or our Discord. So I'll give you another plug on the Discord. So with that, any questions? I mean, I saw a bunch of things in the chat or any other questions or comments, honestly. I mean, I saw there was a lot of opinions about ACA and ACI. Would love to hear from anybody with opinions or questions.
And if you raise your hand,
yeah,
we can unmute your mic if you prefer to ask in voice. All right, so Jan Hendrik, I've enabled your microphone so you can unmute.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so first of all, great work on the integration. I'm really happy to see that you're going into this serverless deployment space. I think ACI is a great deployment target, but also ACI in itself as a service, also from a pricing perspective, is more made for like short running stuff. So ACI as a service itself is not really made for continuously running containers on that. So that was why I was asking for container apps in the chat, because the main target of ACI is basically spinning up a container real quick, doing some stuff and then destroying it again. That's also why it is basically priced on like per second, per resource consumption basically. And like container app is much more integrated into this whole radio story. So I would be very interested what like your roadmap is and your perspective on like integrating with container apps, especially due to the Dapper integration with container apps, which is working really great and which would also be, I think, very fitting into like the whole story of Radius.
Yeah, definitely. And I think container apps is definitely something that is on our our roadmap, things like container apps and even AWS EC Fargate, or in the future when we support GCP Cloud Run, like those are all platforms that we know are high value for users and cloud developers. But as I had mentioned, we see it as a lot more opinionated compute platforms, in that they have an app model already, and there are certain concepts that we'll have to work around and think about how we can align them with Radius for the integration. And we thought, maybe our initial foray into serverless, that might be a little bit too big or too broad, and we wanted to go somewhere a little bit more unopinionated, raw compute type platform first, and provide those building blocks initially, and then learn from those before we tackle something a little bit more challenging like ACA, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Thank you. And just to quickly add to that, it would also, like, this should or must also include then to be able to run like Radius itself on container apps, right? So that's another endeavor that you would have to look at. So that's probably also a big point, because you don't want to run a Kubernetes cluster just if you are only deploying to ACA. So I can totally understand why this is like a bigger milestone in the future.
Exactly, and that's also something we need to explore as well. Like, specifically, the initial foray is expand to use Radius, the control plane that's running on Kubernetes, to deploy all these serverless compute resources. But eventually, we want to think about, okay, well, what does it mean to host Radius somewhere else and then deploy on that platform? So that's sort of the baby steps we have to take.
Hey, Jan Hendrik, I had a follow-up question. So in your calculus of, your mental model about ACI and some of your thoughts there, how much of in groups are you familiar with? Because I know it's very new to ACI, and I'm curious if the in groups changes your thinking on that at all, or maybe you have no familiarity with in groups.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Okay.
I also tested that in private preview, so or in
Great.
preview at least. And like it's good that it's there. But to be honest, if you are deploying containers at a scale where this would come into play, you were probably already going for ACA, because it has much less of the technical limitations that ACI has in terms of like the number of mounts you can do, like the native Dapper integration, some other stuff. So from my experience, if you like hitting the level of complexity, where you would be running a container continuously and would be profiting from these new pricing models, that then you would also already be evaluating using ACA. So
I
that's
see.
at
Okay.
least how I experienced this with some customers in the past. So I will definitely look for use cases for this in the future, but I think it's quite niche in terms of like the other restrictions that you have with container instances.
Okay. No, that's good to know. I mean, our objective here is not really to be opinionated about these things, and yeah.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
it's good to educate ourselves just in terms of priority, where we spend our time. Alex, you had some comments about the dev experience. Maybe I think established. So here's one. I have a follow-up question on your comment. On the developer experience, I think the quick thing in my mind is, and I'm working on the user-defined resource types. So the way I've been thinking about user-defined resource types is it's essentially a custom catalog of resources for your organization, and it is a contract between developers and platform engineers around these specific resource types. They could be they could be very abstract, like here's a microservice resource type, or they could be more granular. I think as I think about that, and that there's a contract between platform engineers and developers, there is a developer experience aspect of this, of the discovery of the resource catalog or the resource type catalog. And so one of the things we are looking at, we have some mock-ups for developers to browse that resource type catalog to find the most appropriate resource type, and it would have documentation for targeted for the developer, like here's why to use this resource type, here's who to contact if you have questions about it, metadata like that. So that's one DevX aspect that we're looking at in the near term. I'm curious if you have other thoughts on the longer term. No, no worries on the mic. Okay, interesting. Yeah, and the other thing on maybe the getting started dev experience is as we build up this resource, this custom catalog of resource types, when the developer gets started, kind of the RAD and init experience, we'll be integrating, we'll have to do some integration work there to get the developer workstation prepped with the resource type catalog from platform engineers. But yeah, maybe we can connect if you have more time. I'd be interested to know any more perspective. Yeah, awesome. I'll find you and connect with you. So, okay, other questions? Yeah, great, Alex. Thank you. Other questions or feedback from anybody? Let's see how long I can let the awkward silence go. No worries. You know where we are. We are pretty active on Discord, so please join the server and find us there. If you're going to be at KubeCon, please definitely find us in person. We'd love to talk with you. We'll have some demos that we haven't shown yet. We're working on those. So we look forward to it. And I think we'll go ahead and close the call. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.